In an unpredictable world, you can't simply wait for change to happen. We created McKinsey Live for leaders like you. Our global experts break down the need to know on the issues that matter most to decision makers and to society. We'll introduce you to leading research, new and transformational ideas, and practical knowledge and strategies, all to empower the changemakers of today, enabling you to step forward boldly, tackle real challenges, and drive change with clarity and purpose. We're helping you take control so you can drive the conversation, so you can lead fearlessly while leaving no one behind, so you can take the reins to create and accelerate growth, so you can build resilience for the future. Together, we can push towards the opportunities of our era. Let's get started now.
Hello and welcome to McKinsey Live. I'm Lucia Rahilly, McKinsey's editorial director and your host for today's event, What to Expect at COP29. Before we start, a very quick reminder, the goal of this series is to give as many of you as possible the opportunity to engage on our latest research. So please use the Q&A functionality to ask anything relevant that comes to mind during this session. We do have quite a sizable group together with us in the audience today, but as always, we will do our best to answer a selection of your questions throughout. Today, the race to net zero is a once-in-a-generation global challenge. Joining us to give us an insider's preview of what to expect and what's driving the agenda at COP29 are two of our leading experts, Anna Granskjog and Vishal Agarwal. Anna is a partner based in Helsinki, and she leads our sustainability efforts on green business building in Europe. She combines deep industry knowledge in energy and basic materials and consumer goods with expertise in functional capabilities like sustainability and strategy, and she has a particular focus on the circular economy. And Vishal is a senior partner in Singapore. He leads our sustainability work in Asia and has a particular focus on energy transition strategy, green business building, and sustainable finance. Anna and Vishal, welcome to McKinsey Live.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
It's great to be together with you today, and thank you for making the time with COP just around the corner. Okay, so just to level set, COP is, of course, the annual conference where United Nations parties come together to assess our collective progress in mitigating climate change, and also to develop plans for climate action within the guidelines of the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This year's COP29 begins in less than 2 weeks and will take place in Baku, Azerbaijan. So, Vishal, perhaps I can start with you. Talk to us briefly about the objectives of this COP29, why it matters, and what leaders who are in attendance can expect.
Sure, Lucia. Let me start by just giving a context of COP, right? Since COP was established, it has become the convention for all parts of the climate ecosystem to come together for action. And that includes governments, private sector, NGOs, the public, everyone with single goal. And the goal is to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, right? Now, coming to COP29, the COP29 presidency has set out a framework for action, which includes a fixed objective of delivering rapid and sustained emission reductions to keep the temperature under control while leaving no one behind, right? And that is important because the whole sustainable transition has to be inclusive. The framework for action also includes two mutually reinforcing pillars, I would say. And the first pillar is what we call the enhancing the ambition which works to ensure all the parties commit to an ambitious national plan and the transparency towards this national plan, right? And the second pillar, which is to enable action. And this is about moving from plan to action, which also includes the critical role of finance as a key tool to both reduce emissions, to adapt to climate change, and to address the loss and damage. The framework also highlights why it is important of having a process to ensure a very inclusive outcome, given the whole divide between the quote unquote the global north and the global south. And the reality is that we are at a pivotal moment for the planet. It is once in a generation kind of a challenge that we are facing. And COP is a very, very important moment each year for us to just come together and refocus on this challenge at hand. And that's why we at McKinsey is once again convening at COP29. It is a continuation of our long-term commitment to accelerate sustainable and inclusive growth.
Thank you, Vishal. And let's just set a little more context, Anna, so we're clear. Last year was considered to be, I believe, an incredibly productive COP28, lots of energy coming out of it, lots of commitments. My understanding is that this year's COP will be a little different from previous years' gatherings. What's changing at COP29?
So one of the new things from last year is the establishment of what's called the Troika. So that's basically a collaboration now between the 28, 29, and the upcoming Brazil COP30 presidencies, with the idea that there are many things that actually need to follow through from one COP to the next. And so after the global stocktake at COP28 showed that we're not fully on track, the idea came to establish this sort of collaboration that would make sure that themes and topics and collaboration is more integrated between the COPs to secure the continuity, because obviously 2030 is approaching and our goals are still the same, but progress is not. So this is one of the new things that has been established to further some of the objectives that Vishal just went through on the previous page. And obviously we'll also then carry over to the next year. We'll then see what happens after that.
Interesting. Okay, thanks, Anna. This is all good background. Let's turn now to the agenda for COP29. Vishal, what's driving the lineup for COP this year? Any topics or themes that stand out?
Yeah, Lucia. I mean, this year the COP29 presidency has already given out the list of initiatives, and they're centered around three broad principles, which is one is adaptation, the second is the mitigation, and the third, very interestingly, is finance. Right, and I'll talk about the finances. Why is it being called 29 is called finance? And just to give you the overall background, as you might know, COP29 will take over will take place in Baku. It will take place over about 12 days. This would include a few themes, right? So the first one would be the World Leaders Climate Action Summit, where basically the world leaders will present their progress and ambitions across all the pillars of the Paris Agreement. And then there are thematic days where each theme is discussed in detail amongst all the parties. And this is broadly focused on finance, investment, and trade, the science, technology, and innovation, human capital, and the children and youth. And the last one is health, right? As I said, the COP29 is expected to play a very important role in the climate financing equation, both on the mitigation side and also on the adaptation side, right? And that's why it's dubbed as quote unquote finance COP.
Vishal, could we just stay on that for a second? Why such a big focus on finance at this COP? I mean, obviously there's a considerable finance gap, but do you expect to see real tangible action coming out of COP29 in terms of bridging that gap?
It's a great question, Lucia. I can talk later about overall the financing gap and our research around it. But just to talk, stay on this whole topic of why this COP is important in the context of climate finance, is is because the representatives will come together to discuss what is called NCQG, which is basically New Collective Quantified Goal, which is a new global climate finance goal that the Conference of Parties will set out to support developing countries in their climate action post 2025. Now, let me give a bit of a context of NCQG and why this is important. This is not new. The NCQG was originally established back in 2009 at COP15, where developed countries pledged to mobilize about $100 billion annually by 2020 to support the developing countries in their ambition towards transition. However, the developed countries did not meet this deadline. Then in 2015, the Paris Agreement marked a turning point, which actually mandated the establishment of a new and a higher financial goal beyond the initial $100 billion that was originally committed. And this basically reflected the increasing need for climate action, given how much is the gap towards what is needed. Then back in 2021, COP26, which happened in Glasgow, the countries came together and they set out to define this NCQG by 2024. And this is expected to be finalized in COP29. And this is something that we'll be keeping a very close eye on to ensure that these are defined finance commitments post 2025. And hopefully we'll see an increased commitment. We'll also see increased action towards actually meeting these commitments. And the conversations during COP29 will also determine how much should be paid and by whom, which is a very critical question in the whole climate financing ecosystem.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, it seems that this COP may spur some momentum for stronger national climate commitments. Anna, tell us more about these commitments and also given our audience how they could affect businesses in particular.
Sure, Lucia. So let's remind ourselves that already by now, more than 140 countries actually have set a net zero target. The years will differ, but there is a net zero target. And they have defined the nationally determined contributions, NDC plans, to explain how these net zero targets will be reached. And those 140 countries plus countries cover more than 90% of the global emissions. So that was, the whole idea with these NDCs was the heart of the Paris Agreement at the time, and basically the vehicle by which the Paris Agreement goals and the 1.5-degree pathway should be met. Now, last year, we already referred to the global stocktake GST, and that was done for COP last year. And the outcome was to sort of conclude that now we're not on track towards the long-term goals, unfortunately. And therefore, obviously, there is a call for action to now, as the NDCs are being updated, and the updated NDCs are due a little bit after COP29. There's basically at COP29 now an opportunity to send messages and signals to countries preparing the NDC updates about, the ambition level and reminder of the 1.5-degree ambition. And what target, what actions will be required to get back or closer to track. And so what does it mean for businesses is obviously to keep a close eye on the NDCs as they come out, because they will then be translated into policies and regulations in different ways. And of course, policies and regulations can be interpreted as limitations or as opportunities, probably both. But it's important to be proactive and think through also the opportunity side already early on to be able to start acting as soon as it's clear how these NDCs turn out.
Thanks, Anna. Vishal, let's talk a bit. You alluded earlier to the fact that we as a firm have published quite a bit on the energy transition and its role in helping us achieve these ambitious targets. Break that down a bit for us. How are we progressing vis-a-vis the energy transition?
Yeah, it's a good question, Lucia. The energy system today, me start by giving the context as a very, very massive and a very complex entity, right? That has been built and optimized over centuries. Now, just take an example of the oil and gas pipeline. Just the oil and gas pipeline spans about 2 million kilometers. That's enough to go from Earth to Moon and back twice. We have about 60,000 power plants on the planet, right? And despite that, a big part of the world is still under energized, right? The energy demand is growing also in every part of the world, even in the developed parts with the whole Gen AI and artificial intelligence coming in. Now, energy transition is the process of shifting this whole energy system that we have built over centuries from fossil fuel to renewable sources to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and limit this climate change. And at the core of this energy transition is the physical transformation, and it is not easy, right? We have actually looked at all the technologies that can play a very meaningful role in this energy transition, and we shortlisted about 12 of these technologies that will play a disproportionate role. The interesting thing is that if all of these 12 technologies are scaled up, 90% of all the abatement that needs to happen by 2050 can actually be supported. However, only 10% of these technologies are today scaled at the level that we want, right? And these would include technologies like renewable energy, which has scaled up massively over the last few years and is continuing the transition. One of the technology that has met its overall trajectory between now and what we expect in 2030 is, say, electric vehicles. But most of the other technologies have not scaled up, right? This gap between the 10% that have scaled and the 90% that is available is a very, very critical journey that we need to bridge. And there are two reasons why these technologies are not scaling up yet. One is some of these technologies are still early, so they're not fully mature, and that would be about half of this the gap. And the other half is basically due to the fact that they are not yet commercially at scale. And we have detailed a lot of this in our the hard stuff report. If you look at technologies like hydrogen or biofuels, they are only at a fraction of what was expected the trajectory for these technologies to be by 2024 and the trajectory towards 2030, right? So they definitely need a very different inflection point. So I had to summarize, basically there are two quote unquote flaws that we are trying to manage with this whole energy transition. And that's basically 85% of the CO2 emissions are associated with the energy system that has been built over the centuries. And that's a big impetus for energy transition. But the way also the energy systems have been built over the centuries is that 2/3 of this energy is actually wasted, right, in the conversion, in the transportation. So we need to manage both of these as we think about energy transition.
Thanks, Vishal. So you invoked a specific piece of research, an NGI report called The Hard Stuff, which folks can find on our website. McKinsey.com goes into quite a bit of depth on the physical challenges Vishal alluded to. In other words, the physical material transformation that's necessary to help us achieve net zero. Anna, that's a big report, but could you give us a little bit of the overview there?
Absolutely. It's a handsome 196 pages, in fact. Now, what it sets out to do, as Vishal described, is really looking at the physical things that need to be deployed, and then what are some of the challenges in doing that. And as he mentioned, certain technologies that will be required aren't efficient enough today, so it becomes extremely expensive to try to deploy them and very impractical. So they need to first, like energy density in batteries for heavy traffic, for instance, could be an example for EVs. Now, and there are other technologies that still require further innovation, like direct air capture. Maybe that also goes into the efficiency part. But it's also very complex because you need electricity first to power the direct air capture units, and then you need a way to actually do something with the CO2 that you have captured, transport it somewhere, then store it or reuse it. So it becomes relatively a relatively multi-step process where there's putting the system together can be very hard. And Also, as Vishal alluded to, in energy, we're not always super resource efficient. That, of course, also goes for other materials. And you mentioned circular economy up front. And I think in our system, we're still not fantastic at leveraging resources in a circular manner. Part also because the economics of doing so aren't necessarily better than actually using virgin materials. In plastics, for instance, could be a great example there. So what we did in this report was trying to understand which are the most important challenges, and then we tried to classify them in how difficult are they. And the hardest that we call level 3 challenges have a cost issue. They have simply a potentially technology breakthrough issue, or at least not breakthrough, but still technological evolution needed. And they have a just physical scale issue. So again, it has taken us a few years to build 2 million kilometers of oil pipelines. If you want to build even a fraction of that in hydrogen pipelines or CO2 pipelines, it takes time and it requires physical space. It requires long supply chains. It requires compressors, valves, the whole lot. So there's just physical things that need to happen that when you stack them up can take quite a long time. Now, if you look at what are some of the most critical areas then where all of these challenges occur at the same time, making them the hardest challenges or the hardest stuff to crack, so to speak. If we talk about the energy system, the number one on the electricity side would be how we integrate intermittent renewables into our power system. So while solar power and wind are obviously very, very low emission as such, their production profiles are very different from our consumption needs typically, which means that the energy system has to be balanced in some way, which becomes challenging when you have large volumes of intermittent capacity. Also, the market mechanisms that set prices in our energy systems often make it even harder to commercially figure out the solution. So that's definitely one of the big areas. If you look at the industrial side, in fact, the decarbonization of industrial processes to make the materials we use the most, be it steel, be it chemicals, ammonia, concrete, or cement, they are also big physical challenges because we need to basically at least partly rebuild all the production infrastructure to make these materials. And then, as I mentioned, direct air capture, but carbon capture in general, it's also still from a technology perspective, not very cost efficient, it's not very energy efficient, and it's relatively cumbersome. So these are some of the examples of some of the hardest transition technologies to crack. Now, what does this mean for businesses again? Sometimes we ask our clients when they have an innovation, what problem is this solving? I think here the good thing is that the problem to be solved is very clear, or the problems to be solved are very clear. So the question is then, what can companies do in order to take advantage of the opportunity? Because there is significant capital to be deployed, and therefore there are significant innovation opportunities, technologies themselves, how to deploy them, new business models for deploying them. But of course, it's not trivial, and we really do not want to send that message. And so for companies, it's all about how to balance the right timing, the right amount of risk, and the right types of investments. And I think one of the key things that we find time and time again when we look at what is going on is that companies who team up to collaborate, both to share the risk or allocate the risk in a smart way to different parties who are best positioned to carry different parts of the risk, and to jointly understand the market and jointly understand what the right timing is and when the right timing is, and to also bring their collective strengths together. I think we see better progress and better results in deployment and scaling of clean technologies. So if there was one topic I would underline for companies in terms of how to take advantage of the opportunities, finding the right partners to collaborate with across the value chain is one of the most important themes I'd like to highlight.
Thanks, Anna. That's super interesting. I'm mindful of time. There's so much to cover here. So I want to move quickly back to financing, which we mentioned earlier in the discussion. Obviously, it underpins all aspects of the energy transition, including this physical transformation that you were just describing. Vishal, what role can financial institutions play in financing the net zero transition, very briefly?
Yeah, look, I mean, all these themes that Anna was talking about need a lot of financing, right? And financing will be, as we mentioned before, will be one of the critical discussion points at COP. As if I think about it, the whole net zero transition is one of the biggest capital reallocation of our times, right, in the history. We did some research to look at the magnitude of capital that will be required to enable this transition between now and 2050, and that amount is about $9.2 trillion per year, right? And that's about 30% more than what is allocated today. And we were not even meeting what is allocated today. So there's a huge gap between the amount of capital that is needed and that is going into the whole transition of this whole ecosystems, right? Now, as the enablers of the whole global economy, financial institutions, of course, have a very, very core role to play, and all sorts of financial institutions, right? Be it the banks or the MDBs or the philanthropies. I mean, everyone who is deploying capital is very important for this to come together. And by doing so, all of these banks and investors can both drive innovation. I talked about how these technologies will need to move up the technology curve. They can support scaling. By scaling, actually, we have seen the cost of these technologies can come down by about 70 to 80%. So deploying capital and scaling of these technologies is very important. And this capital deployment, much like what Anna was talking about on the whole technology, this will require collaborative effort amongst all the stakeholders. It is not possible to be done in silos, right? Now, three broad themes that come to my mind, which I think could make a significant difference. Number one is the transition finance. And now I'm differentiating this between from quote unquote the green finance. There's a lot of funding that is going into, say, renewables, but there is not enough going into the technologies that can move the brown assets to green, right? So this is something that has to be deployed at scale. The second I would call out is the blended finance. And this is where different pools of capital come together to structure the risk reward in such a manner that the technologies or projects that are not technically in the money can actually become can get into the money, right? So this will really help scale up a lot of innovative finance. And the third is we need some sort of a carbon pricing that can enable deployment of capital to the most efficient means of transition. And that is enabled by something called transition credit. And this was a big theme that was discussed in COP28. I'm hoping this will continue to be discussed both in COP29 and COP32 through Troika, right? So these are some of the ways through which I think the financial institutions can make a significant difference to this gap that is needed to bridge the transition.
Thanks, Vishal. I am mindful of time. We also wanted to cover green businesses and just general, how leaders can create value in this net zero transition, but I think we are too short. So what I would do is encourage members of our audience to visit our website, mckinsey.com. We have so much published research in both of these areas. And I just quickly want to pivot to, we've talked a lot about what's planned at COP and some of these key discussion points. Vishal, could you just tell us a little bit about what we'll be up to in Baku? What is McKinsey doing at COP29?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we spoke to many of our clients. We spoke to the global leaders to really curate something that will be meaningful. And our theme is moving towards action, right? So this is really getting to actionable outcomes. And we'll host about hundreds of business leaders and stakeholders for discussions around how do you move to progress. We'll have both virtual and in-person sessions, and we'll cover a wide range of topics which are listed here on the slide. You can read from accelerating the future of mobility to hyperscaling the green businesses, which is one of the very important themes that we believe in, but also very importantly focusing on adaptation which is becoming increasingly important, and not just on the mitigation, right? And if you plan to be in Baku, we hope that you will register to attend our executive sessions. If not, well, feel free to tune into some of the virtual sessions, and we'll share the updates from on the ground to keep you updated on some of the critical topics that the leaders across the world will need to undertake to tackle the climate change.
Thanks, Michelle. And I want to just ask one really quick question. It's, the $6 million question from the audience here. We can squeeze it in. The UN Environment Program has just announced in a new report that the world is on a trajectory toward being 3 degrees hotter by the end of the century. And obviously, we were working toward containing the rise at 1.5 degrees. Anna, you serve companies in this space. How optimistic are you at this point that the world can meet a 1.5 degree pathway? And are there any, examples of plans to contain that that you think are really noteworthy?
I think at this stage, it's important that we take action. And even if we end up at 1.7 and not 1.5, I think that would be fantastic. So it is, I think, important, as we said earlier, to note that we actually globally are committed, right? We are making the net zero plans. So we are kind of getting beyond this why to the how. And we need to fully focus even more on the how. And with the how comes a lot of practical challenges. That comes the cost, comes the technology, comes what leaders do, what CEOs do, the collaborations, the financing. And I think solving those problems one by one as they appear, but in collaboration, is going to be the make or break here. So I obviously hope that we will get very, very close to the 1.5. I have no crystal ball, but I know that we will not get there unless we really kind of pace up the action. And so maybe with that, I don't have the answer, but I hope that we can trigger some further acceleration of action nevertheless.
Yeah, let's hope that this COP helps in that regard. That brings us to time. This has been such a fantastic discussion. Anna and Vishal, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucia.
And as always, many thanks to all of you who are watching. You'll be able to find a replay of this and our previous McKinsey Live sessions at mckinsey.com/live. And a reminder and an invitation, as Vishal said, please join the virtual and in-person series of events hosted by our experts during COP29. It will be broadcasted live online daily, and you can sign up using the QR code that appeared before and could appear again now if our producers flash it up. Our next McKinsey Live session, there it is, folks, register. Our next McKinsey Live session will take place on November 18th. It's on redefining the role of the tech officer, and you can register for that also using the QR code on your screen. Have a great day or evening, and we will see you next time on McKinsey Live. Thanks a lot.